Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kink Tank. And we have our esteemed panelists here that are going to help me today in talking about physical play limitations. And these are the things not necessarily that are negotiated as limits, types of play that you enjoy or don't enjoy, hard limits, soft limits, but things that keep that limit the types of play that you are able to do physically, whether it's from a surgery or a condition or just a sore spot that time. So let's talk about different kinds of play that we do and where this has come up before. I know for me it's come up, where someone's got like a bum ankle for a while, and I think it requires some attention, and it's a topic that we should get into. So what are some of these? I had mentioned earlier in sort of the pregame, like pregnancy, for instance. There might be some physical play limitations, and there's probably some controversy of whether that person should be doing BDSM or sadomasochistic activities in the first place. So what other kinds of things are we talking about here with physical play limitations?
I realize I'm always like the fly in the ointment, but I think one of the things I'd really like to start with is the fact that if you are going to be engaging in play when you are negotiating play, I think it's really incumbent on the people involved to ask the question about limitations. Before we get into what those are, I think it's a conversation that you have to have, because I have seen people have conversations pre-play at parties or whatever where a bottom had said, listen, this is a limitation I have, and seen the top completely disregard that and have the scene go exactly as the bottom expected it would because they didn't pay attention. And I think it's really important to have that discussion for tops, to ask the bottoms if they have any limitations, because sometimes you don't think about them in terms of play, right? All of a sudden, that bondage that you're doing, Brian, doesn't make sense because you've got a bad shoulder.
Yes, and I try and be proactive with that. So rather than just ask somebody, do you have any limitations, I will start and name things. I will say, do you have any pins in your hand? Do you have a bum leg? Do you have carpal tunnel? Do you have a pacemaker? And I will just start naming things to try and refresh their memory, perhaps, or to let them know that I'm interested in more than just their skin.
Yeah, and I think
I've had a couple different situations where somebody will say, no, I have nothing, and then go to start putting rope on. Oh, but I have a torn ligament in my shoulder. But what? Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out, I think it's a really important discussion to have. And if I hadn't seen it myself, I probably wouldn't be as cognizant of it. But I saw somebody who said, I'm really sensitive on particular parts of my body, and if we're going to do an impact play scene and you hit those parts of my body, it's going to be really short. And as it turns out, that person was not lying and passed out, I think, like 6 minutes into the scene.
So that's a really good point, and I agree with that. And again, tops, be proactive. How is your butt today? How are your shoulders today? How is this? How is that? Because bottoms, unfortunately, will forget. And I don't think it's malicious or trying to sneak things in and, well, I got a bum hip, but I want to play anyway, so I just won't tell them. I think it's a matter of they just kind of forget. Oh, well, I live with this pin or this hip replacement I've had, and I don't think about it. But when they're prompted sometimes, oh, yeah, actually I do have this problem. So that's a good point to bring up.
And that's great for you, because I know that obviously you do a lot of rope and I do a lot of impact play, so I will actually touch the people where my impact play is going to come into contact, and there are people here that can vouch for that, and I'll say, is it okay if I'm going to be hitting you here? I really like to make sure that I'm kind of covering those areas, and then I'll have some people say, yeah, there's good, but if you get into my hips, it's going to be more problematic. So I have a sense of where that's going to be, those limitations in terms of, for me, it's really a matter of trying to make the scene as good as possible, and so if I can accommodate those limitations, it's going to be a better scene for both people involved. And that's why you really want to take those things into account, not because someone's going to be pissed with you or whatever else, but because you can really make the most out of it when you understand what limitations you have and work with those or around those to get the best out of it.
Yes, and that's not service toppy. That is actual toppy. That is, I want to have a good session and I want to get the most out of my bottom, and I need to know the best way to do that without the bottom, reading early or calling the scene.
And some of these limitations are pretty apparent. Somebody comes to the dungeon party in a wheelchair. You're like, well, I'm going to have to, think about this. Or a walker. One of the parties that I've been to recently came in with a walker. So, you know, it's a conversation that's pretty apparent that you're going to have before you can start playing. But you're right, there are a lot of these sort of hidden ones and the ones that they kind of forgot about, you know, whether it's, you know, an ankle injury from years ago or something like that. Some people have bad knees, and so they're walking around or they're playing or whatever, and they may not realize that the scene that you're about, you know, if you're in the scene, that they might be able to be on their knees for 5 minutes, but they can't be on their knees past that. It's not something that was in their mind, like, oh, I have bad knees, because normally their knees work fine. It's only when you put them on their knees for 5 minutes then they start having a problem. So they may not even be aware of what's coming next, that this thing could be a problem.
And that may be as simple an accommodation as moving to across from a spanking bench, because the spanking benches that we have those like little kneeling cups,
mm-hmm.
and that, like you said, that might be a problem after 5 minutes.
Right. And I think that there's a certain, correct me if I'm wrong, Bottoms, that when you're negotiating with somebody that you really want to play with, that there might be a reflex or a desire to sort of minimize those things, to maybe not seem demanding, maybe not seem, you know, like disagreeable. You know, they still want to be appealing to play with, or not have a whole bunch of gotchas where the top's just like, you know what, fuck it, I can't work with this. So, you know,
I think maybe for newer bottoms that's a real thing. I think the bottoms in the community that have been playing for a while kind of know better, and they know what they want. They know what is going to give them a good experience and let the top have a good experience. Like you said, that's not service toppy. If anybody, I'm going to have a scene with anybody, and they ask me, what are your problem areas? And I start to list these things, and they accommodate those things. I don't feel like they're necessarily doing me a favor, but now they're going to get a better scene out of it too.
Well, so, as far as like being pleasing, being agreeable, being somebody that the top wants to play with, does it take a mishap or a problem in order for them to learn that one? Like a bad experience?
To be fair though, Michael, I agree with you, but I think one of the things that I have found, and again, when you deal with more experienced bottoms, is not that they are necessarily more willing to share that information with you, but that they have discovered that knee that they walk around fine on every day acts up if they're on their knees for more than 5 minutes. But sometimes you don't know that until you've gone through it.
Or standing on the cross, like until you've been on a cross for a while, you don't realize that slat that you stand on. If you have bad ankles, that'll start to affect your ankles, and you don't think, oh well, you know, this dom I want to play with is gonna whip my back and my butt and my thighs, and so I think about those things. But I've got a recent injury on my ankle, and maybe I can't. Like, some of that takes time and practice and knowledge and experience to know those things.
I don't think that's just a newbie mistake. I think experienced people do it too. It just depends on how long you've been playing with the person. So you can be a really experienced bottom, but then have a new top, and I think that it does come from a place of not wanting to be disagreeable. That's absolutely true. A lot of people will tell you that. I think also not wanting to disclose like a weakness, also, especially to someone that you don't know super well. Like, I know that personally, I have a disorder in the veins of my legs. I have very bad circulation in my legs. I always have. It's genetic. And I wouldn't want me to tell someone, listen, I can't stand still, and also I won't be able to stand straight with my knees straight for a long period of time, or as long as most people can, because my legs fall asleep. But that doesn't mean that I can't take a lot of pain. So, because a lot of people are going to hear that and then go, oh, well, you have something wrong with you. I'm going to make sure I take it gentle. And then I've really just ruined, like, everything is messed up there because you were kind of a pussy about it. And that's not on me. That's kind of on that top and maybe the way that I explained it. But, like, I think that's the fear of a lot of people, disclosing a kind of thing that they need someone to be mindful of. And it really speaks to the experience of the top, I think, because an experienced top hears something like that and says, great, that's a way that I'll just tailor my play and it'll be cool. An inexperienced top hears that as a hindrance and a handicap and then just goes, I don't know, I'm not skilled enough to compensate for it.
Yeah, and at worst, a manipulation that
yeah.
You are telling me this so that I can't get what I want or play the way that I want to play or something like that. Yeah. And honestly, I've felt that way before, but it's usually when those things come up sort of mid-scene that I have felt before that some people have used physical limitations as a manipulation, as a way to grasp some kind of control or to, but there's really nothing you can do as a top. You have to listen to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that means that you have to stop the scene because you think they're fucking with you or what, then you have to stop the scene. But it has to stop. Most people aren't like that. I've felt that, and maybe it was from people that I didn't know as well or didn't have a certain amount of trust for. I mean, there are partners that I have right now that would never happen. That if they're saying, this is, my legs are falling asleep or something like that, it's not like, they're just tired of standing or they need a breather from the beating that I'm giving them or something. They're not manipulating the scene. What it means is exactly what it says. So I think that, if that's something that does occur to you as, sort of a grasp for control, because I know that even when you're negotiating with people, I have to tell you, Shane, kind of like you were talking about aftercare, when people are like, I need this and I need this and I need, I need these 6 things, you're just kind of like, maybe we shouldn't play. And I know that when it comes to physical limitations, I guess, if people are saying like, I have a restricted range of motion here, I have, circulation problem there, carpal tunnel, something like that. But I guess if they're pointing out like 10 different boo-boos and danger zones, I do kind of feel like maybe I don't. And I think it's unfortunate because that's the same kind of reaction that gives the bottom type people the reflex of concealing those things. Because they don't want to be disagreeable or seem picky or appear to be manipulating it, whatever. So how do you find the balance in there? How do you make it where you can communicate well, have your needs heard and met without being toppy, demanding, disagreeable, or whatever?
I think a lot of it has to do with your tone. And also, I think it's kind of like when you're telling something to a child. If you say it like you're scared, they become scared. If you say it like you're angry, they think that you're yelling at them. It is very much the same thing. If I tell you, hey, if you're going to tie me up, you need to keep it above the knee. You absolutely cannot tie me up on the bottoms of my legs because it hurts like a motherfucker. If I say that like it's no big thing, the same as I would say, you have blonde hair, then I don't think people respond to it with a freak out. Now, if you go, now sit down, I have a list of things that I would like to discuss with you, you kind of put off the alarm bells. And maybe if that's the way that you feel that you need to communicate it, that's cool. But you're also going to have to show a little grace when that person goes, listen, I'm not equipped to deal with your special needs. It's not a criticism of you. It's just an honest thing to say. But I think your tone has a lot to do with it.
I think another thing you can do there is add in the things that you do want that you can do. So not just lead off with I can't do this and I can't do this and I can't do this. But if somebody were to come to, I guess either one of us and say, hey, I'd like to feel what it's like to go on rope, but I have some problems, I have some issues. I have a problem with my shoulder. I've seen you do an arms out chest harness. I think I'd like to try that. Come to the table with things that you can do, that you do want to try. If with Impact I knew that the backs of my thighs were just super tender and I can't take a lot there, and I wanted to play with somebody in an Impact scene, I would tell them, this, probably stay away from the back of my thighs, but I can take this and this and this toy on my shoulders or on my butt or on my front, or I can do X, Y, and Z, instead of just leading with a list of all of the things you cannot do to me.
The other thing that, as a top, that I do, and I think that's all great advice from the bottom, as a top, one of the things that I do is I'm very clear about the things that I'm interested in doing, and so it tends to limit that conversation to what's going to affect actually what I want to do. So in the example that Sky gave, if I'm going to do an Impact play scene, I'm going to say, I want to hit you here, here, and here, and then she can respond and say, well, okay, you're probably going to have some problems with the backs of my thighs. As long as you avoid that, everything you've said is cool. The fact that you have a gimp shoulder isn't going to affect that, so you don't have to bring in, for the sake of argument, your laundry list of problems. You're only going to outline the things that are going to be, for lack of a better term, limitations in the negotiated scene. You know, if I'm going to do an impact play, I don't really care if you've got carpal tunnel because it's not going to impact what I'm doing. That's going to be relevant if Brian's doing arm ties, for example, right?
Well, and it might be a difference in expertise. It might be a difference in just personality. But I go the other way with it. I want to talk about all of the things and get not only consent but just agreeance upon lots of big topics. And then I don't necessarily hit all of those in a particular session. If you know, and this is again if I'm playing with someone new or someone that I've not played with a lot. I want to have a big palette of things that I can use, even if I'm only going to do a tiny bit of that.
Right.
Because I want to go ahead and have the conversation.
My particular case saying that because my style of play is typically limited to impact play, you know, in public spaces, it's easy for me to say, here are the places I'm going to hit. And then the other question I always ask is, which piece of furniture are you going to be comfortable on for X period of time? Again, so if you've got problems with your knees, it's going to, or your ankles, you know, whatever it happens to be, then you can be a little bit more clear about how you can fit your limitations into what the idea of the scene is, and that way no one's feeling like they've been shortchanged in what's going to happen in that scene. And so if you accommodate those things, you know, again, specific to what your plan for that scene is, then you actually are going to get the most out of it. If I say pick the piece of furniture and you know I can be on that piece of furniture for an hour, well, we now have an hour to play versus, you know, if you put me on a spanking bench, I'm only going to be there for 15 minutes. You know, and to your point, Brian, I think that creates that broader palette when people work together, at least for whatever that design for that scene is going to be.
Right.
What about these things that come up during the scene? You know, I'm not talking about a negotiated thing where people can list all of the, you know, limitations that they have or little ouchy areas that you might need to take it easy or stay away from. But what happens when something like this comes up in a scene, that thing that they didn't think to tell you because they didn't know it was going to be relevant? You know, whether it's, you know, an ankle that is normally fine, but it's like storming outside, so it's acting up, or, you know, just things that happen sort of on the cuff or off the cuff.
Those things do happen. Yeah. And I think that the way that I deal with those things is to kind of hear the bottom and stop and reevaluate. And I've had a couple scenes with this one where she can't get warm. So the dungeon has been a little bit cold, and I have to readjust. And I can tell by her reaction and her verbally and also by her physically, her skin just isn't doing what I want it to do or what I would normally expect it to do. So either I have to do a longer warm-up, or I have to play with this toy rather than this toy, or in one case I think we called the scene very, very quickly after we started it. So I think it's a matter of reevaluation. You can't walk in to a session or a scene with a known script, even though we all want to, even though we all like to, and maybe we all sit at our homes or our offices or on the bus and make a schedule of all the things that we want to do in order to the bottom for a particular session that night. It just doesn't work out that way. So you have to be able to be flexible and not only communicative, but as a top, you have to be reactive and flexible.
And I think the type of play kind of changes some of that too. If we're doing impact and my ankle starts to hurt, I can shift my weight. I can kind of adjust and I can kind of compensate for that without and kind of in reference, and it's absolutely on topic. We have a separate safe word for things like that doesn't call the scene but lets him know I need his attention on something. So if we're doing impact and my ankle's hurting, okay, fine. If I can adjust it, fine. If I can deal with it and suck it up, fine. But if we're in rope and my foot goes numb, like that's very, very different. That has to have an adjustment. So I think the type of play can you can handle that situation differently depending on what you're doing. We're doing fire play and my ankle hurts. Okay, good goddamn bad. Like, all right, keep going. Like, deal with it. I think it varies.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's a situation that's sort of custom made for the yellow safe word. To me, I use yellow and red. I generally don't use green. But you know, red stops things. That means the scene's over. We're gonna, you know, maybe we'll spend some time talking about it. Yellow is a way to sort of pause, where you can give a person an opportunity to tell you that their leg is falling asleep, that they're that they can't be on their knees any longer. So I don't have a separate safe word for that. If that's something that comes up, yellow's the perfect answer for me. If there's like a separate one that you want to negotiate in there, that makes sense for some people. But
I check in a lot. I mean, that's one of those things that when I'm playing, I check in a lot. And it's fun for me because, doing the kinds of impact play that I do, it actually creates a break anyway. But I'm always checking in and, are you okay? Can we keep going? Or, you want more? And it's always an opportunity for the bottom to tell me if there's anything going on, especially stuff that's not related to the scene. Like you said, I'm cold, my feet are bugging me because, like I said, in some of those spaces in dungeons, and it's not limited to ours, but any dungeon where sometimes they have concrete floors and, the bottoms of your feet get sore, whatever the issue happens to be, to Brian's point, as long as you're willing to be flexible, because typically when I'm playing with bottoms who have told me that they have a problem, they're telling me because they want the scene to continue despite what they have going on. They would love to see an adjustment made that allows them to go on. They're not ready to stop, but they can't continue the way things are going. And I think it's a great way for them to be able to say, I've got X problem, can we work around that so that we can keep going? And so I find that if you're willing to work with the bottom and listen to them and accommodate that stuff, then you can continue going on having really good scenes. But again, it requires a little bit of flexibility, and it requires paying attention to your bottom. In my particular case, I generally don't wait too long for physical cues. I tend to check in verbally a lot more frequently. And so, I don't do a lot of things like voice restrictions and whatever. So if people are telling me, my knee hurts, all right, cool, like what can we do about your knee, right?
Well, and I think that's kind of more helpful for people that are newly playing with each other, but less for people that have an established kind of like, we've been playing with each other for a little while, but I still don't totally know what to do about this. Because if constant check-ins aren't really part of what you do, and they just don't go with your style of scene, then you don't have to change that. I think that having a separate safe word is like a really genius idea that doesn't mean red. It's just like come talk to me for a second so that I don't have to freak out. I don't have to turn around and get whipped in the face. Like, it's kind of a safety thing. I think like a little wave, I know some people that will do that. Like if they just kind of like raise their hand a little bit, it means like they need you to come up like just for a second. It doesn't mean red. It just means like, whoa, hey, pay attention.
I have a rock in my shoe safe word.
Sure, like whatever, like it's just kind of it's not intrusive when you do that. But I also think that one of the ways that I can kind of help communicate with my partner in a way that to me doesn't break me completely out of my headspace, because if I raised my hand and did that, I personally would probably have trouble getting back to where I was. So if I'm like encountering one of those freak things, like usually it's totally cool when you hit me on the back of my right thigh, but for some reason today it was leg day, and like you're killing me. Like I just can't deal. I'll put my hand on it, which is not something that I would normally do, or I'll just keep doing one of these, like keeping it away from you. And at least with the people that I play with regularly, they will, at that point, when I start dancing around or like keeping something away from them or covering it with my hand, they will usually come up to me. Usually that is because they want to say mean things to me about it and let me know in no uncertain terms. They will continue to do it, but thank you for doing that. I think that because you've brought them close, now you have an opportunity to be like, oh, hey, glad you're here. That's just not, like, I'm going to have to red if you keep doing that. Please don't do that, and let's keep going. It's just a little bit less intrusive for me. It's like one of those polite manipulations, like I needed you to come up here, but I didn't want to say, hey, come over here. And it tends to work for me and my partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's something when you've played with somebody for a length of time, you can sort of, get the feel for that.
That language develops over time, I think. And when I say language, I mean those means of communicating, whether verbally or non-verbally, become easier to interpret over time, for sure.
Yeah, but you might not realize that you have that language with your partner until you need to capitalize on it in a situation like that. So it's something that people should know that they have.
What about these things that are sort of inherently, I don't know, I mean, if we're talking about, I'm trying to think of types of play that, working with somebody with a disability, for instance. Okay, so somebody in a wheelchair can't do anything that requires standing. So, when you want to do some kind of play that requires standing, you're kind of at an impasse. Like, what do you do? Do you not play with the person? Do you try and find some workaround? Do you, what do you do? I know rope people have this frequently where you're talking about range of motion, flexibility. They would like to do this tie, or they would like to be suspended from the ceiling, but they're 350 pounds and not very flexible. So I mean, what do you do in that case when it seems like the limitation is
Do you want the answer? The answer is you suspend the chair. So one of the nice things that I will say about the rope community is we try and be as absolutely inclusive as we possibly can.
I vouch.
I'm sorry?
You said I vouch.
I said I vouch.
So regardless of weight or physical disability, or we try and make it work. I am not enormous. I am 5'5", maybe 5'6". It is difficult for me to tie people that are taller than me, but I will do it if I can, and if that means that I put on a chest harness that I would normally apply standing up, and I have the bottom kneel instead, or if I have to get on my tiptoes, I will do it. I have not personally put any rope on somebody with a physical disability, but I've seen video of it, and sometimes that involves getting special rope. Sometimes that involves getting a hold of the wheelchair and just having some time to lab out with the wheelchair. But there are absolutely videos on the internet and on FetLife where somebody, completely wheelchair bound is up and floating around, and I think that's a cool feeling for them, and you can kind of see it on their face that they're just elated to be up. So it's not something that you can approach, and I think this is going to be thematic here when we're talking about rope, or whether we're talking about wheelchairs, or whether we're talking about pregnancy. I think that the common theme for this is it's going to take a little bit of an experienced top, and a flexible top, and a communicative bottom to work around limitations. And I think that's kind of the key.
Another thing,
sometimes you have to say no. I mean,
yeah, certainly you can say no. Absolutely.
Totally
and
great.
probably you should.
Far beyond your level. If you really do not feel like you can lift me in an instance where you would have to lift me, then it's not an insult to the person. There's certainly some tact in the way that you tell someone that you can't. But I think sometimes we feel like it's like the worst possible thing to say, no, I can't play with you, and sometimes you just can't.
Well, but okay, so yes, I agree with you. It is completely fair and completely valid, and with tact, it can be reasonably polite to say, no, I'm sorry, that's above my skill level. But I also think that if I was playing with someone that I could not lift, probably I would do a tie where I did not need to lift them. And I think that a lot of people in all factions of the community are going to try and work around some limitations to have that experience and that connection with a person if they want to. And again, much like you said, if your skill level allows it. And that's not to say that everyone's skill level, provides enough wiggle room in terms of safety to be able to service or play with all sorts of types of disabilities. But I think a lot of tops are willing to go a little bit extra, not only just for the experience that they'll have in the session, but just to do the thing. Like, sometimes that's cool.
And it's not always a physical disability that's the limitation. I've heard a lot of people. We post pictures of suspensions online and on Fet, and other people see them. And I've heard a lot of other females tell me that's beautiful, and I really wish I could do that. I can't suspend. I'm too big. No, you're not. You're not too big. Sometimes people think that they have a limitation that is going to prevent them from doing a thing. And if you're not comfortable doing the thing, then that's fine. Again, both parties have the right to say, probably we could, but probably I don't want to. That's fine. But there are ways to work around disabilities and weight and different body types and different. I mean, there are so many different things you can do. You can do the tie a little bit differently. You can add some extra reps. You can like you said, you don't necessarily need to lift a person to get them into a suspension. You can lower some portion of their body instead of bringing them up. There's a lot of different ways in rope that you can work around a lot of different things.
Yeah, and these compensations are a lot easier when that person knows ahead of time that they need to deal with them. So it's one of those kind of things where if you haven't already told them what the limitations are, it's really, really hard for them to craft this experience, no matter how good a top they are. If you didn't tell them they can't hit you there, they can't, like, mid-stop, like, jerk, turn the other direction. You kind of set them up to fail in that regard.
Absolutely.
And I really think that the key for the bottoms is to kind of identify what you want, even if you think it might be out of your own personal ability or a top's personal ability. But think about it and approach an experienced top and just have a conversation about it. If you say, hey, you know what, I'm really into, I really want to try a breast caning, but I've got implants. What can we do about that? And somebody with some experience might know, well, yeah, that's a good idea, or maybe that's not a good idea, or, well, here's how we can, mitigate some risk there. Or impact if somebody has dermals or implants in their back. Maybe you can work around that, and maybe you can't. But it takes a conversation with the top to really know.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I got a bad mic cable there. I just had to yank it out, so we'll deal with this for now. Good stuff. Anybody have anything to add about these physical limitations that we're talking about?
Well, I think that from my perspective, I think we covered a lot of the, which is be open and attentive, be clear in terms of reporting these things, try to work with them to make them work, and if they don't work, then have the courtesy to say no gently.
Yeah. And know that they're not rare.
Yeah.
They're pretty common.
Yeah, and I think that if I just feel like as a top person that I would feel like a better top and a more accomplished top and a, well, let's just say better top, if I can find a way to swing with that, you know what I mean? Like, if it's beyond my skill level, that's fine. We shouldn't have a scene right now. If I don't know what, cystic fibrosis is, then I don't know what that really means for our play. But I feel like, give me a little bit, and let me talk to some people, and let me do some research, and let me see if we can find something that works. I think that enriches me as a top, if you can find a way to make that work. Or the pregnant thing that I had mentioned, like, I don't know how to play with a pregnant woman. I don't know if you should. I don't know what you have to look out for. I don't know. But, if I was really interested in playing with the person and having a scene, connecting with them, I'd want to find out. I'd want to do the research, and I think I'd probably end up being better for it.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap it up there, and I think we'll move on to our next topic. And that next topic is the value of being out kinky.
Yay!
Yay, being out kinky. Now, we've talked about this topic a number of times from a number of different sort of angles and perspectives, but what we haven't really done is talk about what specifically is in store for you. Is that a cat on the screen?
I apologize.
No, it's fine. She's a ham. But let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, various people in this chat are in various degrees of outness. But what does it do for you? What are the good things that, the real value of it, not just because, you can live an integrated or authentic life, etc. But I want to get into the specifics, because Josie, when we were talking about this before, you were talking with somebody who had very specific questions about being out to healthcare professionals and enumerating the positives of that, even if you're not out to anybody else. What are the positives, for instance, of being out to your healthcare professionals? Therapists, OBGYNs, general practitioners, etc.
Oh, well, I mean, chief among them is you don't set off warning bells when you're up front. There's no reason for them to be suspicious of that mark on your ass that looks a lot like someone beat you up when you tell them ahead of time, Sometimes people beat me up. It's totally consensual. I was into it. It happened yesterday. I'm just letting you know that happened. No one has a cause to be worried about you when you go ahead and you say that. Also, fun fact, when you do that before there's a handprint on your ass, it means a lot more than that, because it doesn't sound like you're making an excuse like I tripped. It sounds like you're saying, like, in the future that potentially might be a thing, I'm just letting you know. So when it is a thing, they go, oh, I remember you told me about that. I think also that, makes them mindful of the way that they interact with you. You establish a rapport whenever you disclose personal information about yourself. That's a pretty personal thing. And you also kind of normalize, like, when you do stuff like that, and it's kind of an indirect positive, but you may have just made it, like, a little easier for the person that comes after you when you're not the first person who has handprints on their body or has rope marks on their leg or whatever, and you just kind of pay it forward in that regard. But you also, for your own experience, create this atmosphere where you can talk to your professional. Because if we spend all this time tiptoeing around it, we're wasting time that you paid for, by the way, tiptoeing around it and making everybody uncomfortable, when I have just found, as a professional who receives this information and as a patient who gives this information, it's just a waste of everybody's time, and 9 times out of 10, it's a positive interaction.
Recently I was talking with somebody who went to go see a therapist, and they told them that they were polyamorous, and they had never heard that word before. And I was like, that seems like a red flag to me, for one, because I mean, maybe it's not in the consciousness of the general public. It's not, a household word. But I do feel like professionals should know that this is a thing, right? So it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, like, oh, you should go see somebody else because they don't understand or whatever. But I do think that there was also a value, an extra value. Maybe they don't get good care from that person, or maybe they decide to go to somebody else. But there was an extra value in that there's one more aware healthcare professional out there. I hope they'll go and look up that word and figure out just what the hell it means.
Well, and you teach them your language. So if you think of it like you're a native speaker, you're native to this country called kink, okay? And you use slang terms that a professional might not understand. So maybe they don't know what polyamorous means, I'm in a poly relationship, but they've seen Sister Wives, and they're like, oh, I get it. That's like that show that I saw, and you're like,
it's like the Mormon religious thing, right?
Yeah,
no.
You're teaching them language that they can now have the conversation in, but, like, they have learned school book French. You are teaching them slang terms, and that is so invaluable because they can't learn it from the literature unless they've committed themselves to learning about kink, which most professionals would probably say they didn't think had a professional value to them. And maybe it didn't until you became their client. So in that regard, I mean, you're giving them language. It's great. Like, hopefully they did go and look up this word and go, okay, that's a thing. Got it.
Yeah. And I'm not saying, somebody who hasn't heard of that word before, or somebody that was like, sadomasochism, what is that? It's like, I don't know if we can continue talking here, because I clearly need somebody, like, if this is a big part of your life, etc. I don't have time to teach you, and I don't think that you can give me good care if you don't know that word.
Yeah. Well, that, and there's also a fear that, so Josie had mentioned you're wasting your time when you tiptoe around it, and I think even more so if it's a therapy setting. So if you tiptoe around it, because you're afraid of the reaction or you don't know how they're going to react, at some point probably it's going to come out. And if you're in therapy, it's a big part of our lives. And if you're in therapy, probably some part of that needs to be talked about. So if you get into therapy and you're 6, 10, 12 sessions down the road, you've been afraid to bring this up, and then you bring it up and they aren't willing to accept it or aren't open to it, or really even worse than not knowing what you're talking about, come at it as a thing that you need to be treated for after you've wasted all of this time.
Yeah, because those first 6 weeks have gone by without genuine context for you and your activities, your personality, your desires, etc.
Yeah.
They're all in that time that you spent without disclosing that. they don't have the context that you are a sadomasochist, a practitioner of kink, or interested in power exchange or age play, whatever it is that you're into. And I think that's you are kind of shortchanging yourself at that point of good care.
Yeah. I think so.
And then you have to start all over again with somebody new.
Yeah, when they flip out on you. No, I can't imagine.
Or they identify that as the problem.
Right.
And that I've seen and experienced, where a therapist will get caught up on that particular aspect in my life or in someone's life, and they it's new to them. Maybe they've heard of it before, maybe they haven't, but probably they don't have a lot of experience with it, and they kind of get caught up on, oh, well, there's your problem,
Right.
And really that's not. Like, if they had more understanding of the thing, that's not necessarily the problem, but because it is out of the norm for what they hear coming in and laying on their couch day in and day out, they kind of identify that as abnormal and thereby problematic.
I know, I'm just imagining. Go ahead, Josie.
No, go ahead.
I'm just imagining the couple going into like marriage counseling and going to the counselor and being like, well, we're polyamorous. And they're like, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that we have love relationships with other people. And the marriage counselor being like, well, there's your fucking problem. So don't do that anymore and you guys will be fine. That's not going to be productive at all. But that's really good to know in the first 10 minutes that you're going to see this counselor.
Yep.
Right, it is good. And so the other nice thing that happens is you might have to cycle through 2 or 3 counselors to find one that is poly-friendly or is kink-friendly. But when you do, A, that's going to be a better fit for you, and B, you'll have somebody to refer your kinky friends to.
Yeah.
And
And
there's
there is-
value there. Like, for us in the community, it's nice to be able to say, oh, well, I need an OBGYN that is kink friendly, and she might know one, she might not, she might need one, and she might be able to go to Josie and ask. I might say to Shane, hey, I'm feeling down, I kind of need to see someone, or we're going through troubles, maybe we need to see someone, do you know of someone? And he can say, oh yeah, because Dr. such and such on such and such road is kink friendly, and we're going to be a lot more we're going to get better care and better help from someone that we know we can walk in the door and be honest with up front.
Yeah, and I think too, so I had kind of a funny experience with that. Like, kind of when I was first getting into the community and first kind of embracing that this was a bigger part of my life than I had anticipated it being, I went to a healthcare professional, and my place asks you questions when you go to your gynecologist about your sexual health, and part of that's because they're a research institution. And so they were asking me, how long have you been in a relationship with your current partner, if you have one? And I was like, 5 years. And then it asks you how many people you've had sex with in the past month. And the answer was more than 1. And I felt kind of weird about that because I felt like it was like this form was weirdly slut-shaming me, and it didn't have a box that I could type this in. And that was kind of my first instance where I was like, all right, okay, so maybe I need to have a conversation. But then the next one was I wanted to get STD testing, even though I had like a steady partner, because I had other partners that were phasing in, and your insurance only pays for one a year. Basically, that's what happens in healthcare. So I kind of just came clean with my doctor, like, listen, I have a relationship, I have 2 relationships, I have 3 relationships, and sometimes I have more than that. I would like to get regular STD testing, and I need you to help me determine how I can do that without having to pay $200 every time, because that can't happen, but I want to make sure that I am safe. And she was like, oh, okay, so you just have like an open, like you're just dating other people. I was like, yes, we are both dating other people. And she said, great. So here's what I need you to tell me the next time you come in and you want to get testing. And she helped me with a workaround to be able to get my insurance to still pay for the testing that I needed and felt entitled to receive. So it was kind of one of those things like where it was super, super awkward in the moment to kind of feel like I had to come clean to my doctor, but she totally took it really well, and she helped me more than anyone could have. Like, I couldn't have figured that out on the internet. She had to tell me about the paperwork in her office that I needed to do, and it was perfect. It saved me a lot of trouble.
Excellent example.
Yeah.
Well, and helps keep you and your partner safe. So there's value there.
Yeah, everybody won.
as long as we're talking about professionals, I think we'd be remiss not to talk about the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom and their website, which is ncsfreedom.org. They have a section on their website for kink-aware professionals, and it's a database. I haven't visited it in a while, so I'm not sure how well it's updated. I know that sometimes in my area in Kentucky there have been a scarcity of kink-aware professionals, but it is a good place to check if you're looking for medical, legal, therapy, something like that. It'd be a good place to check first. So there's that plug there. It's a good resource.
And I would like to throw in another plug, if I could, for aware professionals. If no one's heard of it, Rad Remedy, which is a trans-aware network of doctors. So Rad Remedy, radremedy.org, allows trans people to find trans-friendly and trans-supportive medical professionals. It's a project that's run out of, I believe it's run out of Chicago, but it actually has a database that's national, if not international, for trans-friendly doctors. So
excellent. So I think we've talked about the sort of professionals enough. There are a couple different areas here that I still want to cover. One of those is the workplace and the value of being out in the workplace. Now, this is of some debate, and people feel like, well, it's my sex life. That's really nobody's business. The problem, I guess, is that it can, if you are intertwined with these people in other ways, and that is through social networking, through common friends. I know that sometimes when I pop up as a mutual friend to somebody, it's like a big tip-off that they're into kink because, oh, that Mr. Michael, he's, if you hang out with him, you must be kinky or something. And they're probably not far off, but I think that even though it's really none of their business, I think that some people might make it their business. And to me, it seems like the value of being out in the workplace, or at least, I'm not saying stand up and announce it or write a memo to the people in your office. I'm saying, to be open and give honest answers. The only value to that, it seems to me, is that you're basically taking a weapon away from people who would otherwise cause a problem for you or hold it over you or, basically blackmail you in some way. Am I too far off base? Is there something to that? I feel like it's a good thing.
My opinion on that, Michael, is this. When you're talking about being out in the workplace, you have two options if you are kinky, especially if you are kinky in a community, right? If you are out, if you have a FetLife account, if you have kinky friends on your Facebook, anything that leaves the bedroom specifically, you've got two choices when it comes to work. You can either be out or you can have a plan to be outed. I'm not saying that either of those things is going to happen, but I think you have to have a plan. And like you said, if you are out, you don't have to have a plan for being outed.
Other than that, I don't really know of any. I'm personally not out in my workplace. I never have been for any amount of time that I've been involved, and I've never found any significant negatives to choosing not to be out at work. The Facebook thing is like one of those things. I don't choose to be friends with my work friends on Facebook anyway. It's just kind of a policy that I have. Unless I knew you from somewhere else or you're a very close friend, we've known each other a long time, that's a non-issue for me. I just personally haven't found any negatives, so I don't foresee any super, super great positives that motivate me to be out in the workplace. I will say, though, one of my partners is poly, and he actually made a choice this year to be out in his workplace as poly for a very specific reason. Sometimes we have lunch together, and he did not want the people in his office in this cubicle farm to think he was cheating on his wife. That became a really big thing for him where he felt like his conscience couldn't be clear if he wasn't out. But I really applaud him, and it's been very funny because now they want to be friends with me. It's really hilarious because he works in a position of authority for a very big organization. He has a lot of staff, and I think that it's funny because he did not have a conference call. It's not always as comical as all that. Hey, did you guys know that guy is poly? It's not like that. It's more of a, when his close people ask him, hey, I saw you went to lunch today. He said, yeah, that's Alyssa. We actually went to this place this weekend that was really cool. And he gave them enough pieces of the puzzle to put the puzzle together themselves in this really graceful way. And at a certain point, it reaches a critical mass where his staff just kind of came to him and said, so you date other people. Is that basically what you're saying? Like she dates other people, you date other people. That's your girlfriend, right? And he went, yeah, it is. And they went, okay. And it was seamless. Like nobody freaked out. They ask him questions every once in a while, and he's like, yeah, I got a thing I gotta do. We can't really talk about the dynamics of this right now. But thank you for being interested. Let's talk about it another time. So it's not always like as black and white as all that. Like it's all or nothing. He felt he needed to be out as Polly. He certainly doesn't say, yeah, I'm her daddy, let me tell you about what we did last night. It's not about that. It really is like a very intentional, thoughtful, like, what do you need to get your conscience clear? And for him, it ended up being like the best decision.
Well, and it takes that sort of weapon off the table, the little whispers and the assumptions. And
yeah, it doesn't make him look like an asshole, because he didn't want him to look like an asshole or his wife to look like a stupid person. Neither of those things are true.
Here's another small value, and sometimes it is just the small things, but that also opens him up, or another person in his position, to now he's got 2 pictures on his desk instead of 1.
Yes,
or he
that
doesn't
absolutely
have
was
2.
it.
Yep. So there's value there. I am out at work, and I find value just, kind of in the genuine nature of my interactions there. Not only do I not have to be shy about what I'm doing after work, or why I need to jet a little bit early on Friday afternoon because I'm going out and traveling for some kink event somewhere. It's just it's nice. I don't have to watch what I say. I don't have to feel like I'm lying. I don't have to worry about slipping up. And again, if you're in a poly situation, sometimes you tell stories and you try and swap names out for the name that your coworkers think they know for the person that you actually did said activity with. It's just easier and it's less stressful. The other thing that's nice is I don't have to worry about posting my picture somewhere. I don't have to worry about things getting on Facebook, or I don't have to worry about a coworker walking by and seeing me at a munch or at a coffee, or heaven forbid walking into a party. I think it's just nice, and it takes a lot of worry away. And Michael, you were talking about, Shane, you were talking about having a plan of being outed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times that plan looks panicky when you really don't have a plan. Yeah. And I don't want to live panicky.
Yeah. One of the things that everybody talks about what their motivations are, and I thought Josie's story about her partner coming was a great sort of motivation, right? It puts you in a position of having to explain a lot less, and especially if there's a frequency involved, it leaves you open to a lot more things you have to explain. And I think that's a great motivation for that. But one of the motivations for me, particularly coming out about poly, specifically, I mean, I'm out about everything to everybody for the sake of people watching. But one of the reasons that I chose to come out as poly is because it felt terrible to me to minimize my relationships. Like, this person was important enough to talk to my family about, but as soon as I added somebody else, they were not important enough to talk about. And it felt terrible to me conceptually to have to hide something that, for me, I was really excited about. And it really took away my ability to be able to talk about the legitimacy of my own life, because it was easy for me to be, it would have been easy for me to say, oh, I'm going to an event this weekend, and just kind of leave it open-ended. But there are events that I go to with one girl versus events that I go to with another girl. And it's just very nice to not have to parse that stuff. One, it's like you said, it's just much easier to keep track of. Like, what stories did I tell person X? What name did I use? And I got to remember to keep using that name. But more importantly, it really felt bad to me to say, ultimately, I don't think you're important enough to reveal your existence to people that are important to me.
Yeah, it feels like a dishonor. And I think on the power exchange or the kink side of things, there can be an element to that too. When folks in your workplace, for instance, are aware of, the fact that you're kinky, or, so sometimes these things, or especially with your family, that these small shows, or these observances of power exchange between you are okay now. They don't have to be dirty little secrets or strange things. I mean, yeah, you don't make overt, we've talked a lot about moderating our behavior on this show, but I'm talking about, little services and things like that. They go, oh yeah, they do that.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think is really important for people to remember is that when we talk about being out, and I think people have alluded to this, but I think it's fair to be very, very specific in this case. Being out is not the same as writing out a memo of all of your kinks to the people. Like, there is a great deal of privacy that I maintain even in being out. My parents know that I'm out. But just like I know nothing about their sex life, and why would I want to, they know nothing about my sex life. But kink for me, especially when you are talking about, again, my version of kink is being out in the community and kinky. So if I were not out, there's always that risk of being outed. And so it's really more my presence in that community that being out allows me to more easily explain. What goes on behind closed doors is no one's business any more than when, I was leading a more monogamous vanilla existence. I never talked about the specifics of my sex life then. I don't feel compelled to talk about the specifics of my sex life now. But for me, being kinky or being out as kinky lets people know that, oh, Shane's going to one of those things this weekend, and they may not understand what goes on there, but they know that it occupies a space in my life that is important to me, and that I don't want to have to keep explaining over and over again or keep trying to cover. I mean, especially now where I'm traveling 2 to 3 weekends a month, that's a lot of covering to do. I mean, what am I, a Fuller brush salesman all of a sudden, and I've got to go to Des Moines to bust out the new fat brush?
Yeah, and that's why
you start running out of stories.
And that was part of my impetus too, because community being such an integral part of my life, and events going on, and then running a dungeon space and all this other stuff, that I just couldn't juggle it all anymore, and it just took a big load off of me to be able to be honest. Now, interestingly, when I had the conversations with my family about being out, or when I came out to them, you're right, Shane. There is still a lot of privacy that I have, and a lot that they don't know, and a lot that they know that they don't want to ask about, and a lot that they, I never got the question even, are you the top or the bottom? I never, are you the doer or the doee? That question never came up, and maybe they make assumptions or figure it out or something, but it wasn't important. It wasn't. Yeah. And if they had asked, I'm not sure if I would say, yeah, that's none of your business, really. Yeah. I'm not sure, but when we're talking about some very basics, that is still private to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I would want to share details with coworkers. Like, if they find out that I'm in the kink or in the community or something like that, and they're like, so are you like the one who gets hit or the one who does the hitting? I might be like, well, you already know too much. So
yeah. I think what we're saying is, it's a difference between an all or nothing way. I think most people think that being out is all or nothing. You're either that freak in the corner or you're the country mouse in the other corner. And I have found, and it took me a lot of trial and error to figure it out, that there is a totally kind of dialed in dimensional way that you can figure out what you want to do. So like I said, I have not found any super, super huge benefits, and maybe it's just my own fear of being super out at work. But that doesn't mean that I lie about things. So I very often have shoe polish under my fingernails. It gets under my fingernails, and really no amount of cleaning gets it out in a timely manner. And when people ask me what it is, I could say that it is art supplies, but nowadays I don't say that. I usually say, oh, I like to polish my boyfriend's shoes. And that's the truth. They don't need to learn terms like boot blacking and service to understand I polished his shoes. And it's not a big deal. They go, oh, that's cool. It's kind of an old school thing to know things about. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of a cool thing I do for him. And they're like, that's cool. And then they move on along. I have pictures of 2 different people on my desk. I've never had my coworkers put me in a position to have to explain. If they did ask me, I would still tell them, that's my person that I've told you about. I don't think you've met him before. This is my other person that I may have not told you about it. Now you've seen him. But I don't have to say, like, it's a whole poly thing, and he has this many partners, and he lives here, and he does this.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had people be really respectful of those boundaries, but I would still consider myself not to be out.
Yeah, and it absolutely does not have to be a written memo, and you do not have to walk in every Monday morning with a bullhorn and explain to all your coworkers what you did over the weekend. I'm absolutely out at work, and anybody that wants to ask a question can, which I'll get to in a minute, but there are people at work and in my life that probably don't care and probably don't want to hear about it at all, and we don't have conversations about it. If I need someone's signature on a piece of paper, I don't have to have that conversation with them to be able to do my job. But another benefit of being out, either in your personal life or in your work life or in your family life, is you become sort of a beacon, and you might come out to an office of 40 people, and probably most of them aren't going to care. Maybe one or two will judge you, but probably not. And if they do, it's not to your face, and fuck them anyways. But you also might find yourself in a position where someone might come in and close the door and sit down and say, hey, I've kind of got a weird thing that happened to me this weekend. I kind of want to talk about something, and I thought you might be the person. And you get to be kind of a nurturing, supportive role to the people that are close to you and in your life to have a little bit of insight into things that they might be experiencing. That's kind of neat, and I enjoy that.
My social life, I have a lot of vanilla friends. You know, my Facebook, because I'm out, doesn't segregate between kinky and vanilla in the way some other people's do. I've got one Facebook account, and all my friends from high school are on there. You know, and all of my kinky friends from now are on there, so my parents are on there. Like, that's just my centralized kind of social media thing. And because my vanilla friends know that I'm kinky, the number of messages that I have gotten, like private messages about, oh, you know, I had somebody approach me wanting to do this. What are your thoughts on it? Like, how, you know, it's never been something weird happen, but it's usually you become an unexpected resource, or you unexpectedly become a resource for people who have questions, and there is no real, like, you know, chicken soup for the maybe I'm kinky soul, and so you sort of become the, well, I know Shane's been doing this for a while, he must have answers. Well, I don't know that I really do, but at least you have somebody that you can open that conversation with and maybe get some guidance towards other resources, or you know, what to expect when you're expecting kind of questions.
You kind of become like the guy who knows about computers, like, oh, my ship's
broken, yeah, exactly.
You know, or the guy with the pickup truck when you have to move or something. I agree with all that. I would, however, caution about workplaces, and they all have different cultures, and they all have different, cultures, I guess. And if you are, there are some lines that you can cross over there. That is basically between, coming out proactively or being honest, like not hiding things. But then there's also the sort of recruiting level. And for a lot of workplace policies and so forth, that kind of talk between coworkers isn't really acceptable. And you have to be careful about that. I would recommend, at least in the workplace, and it depends on the culture. I mean, sometimes I know one of my partners like works in a hospital, and they're just like, man, my mouth has gotten so foul over the last several months because it's fuck this and bitch that, and you know, that's like the culture of work. They swear. If you don't swear, they, you know. And in other places that would be completely unacceptable. So you have to know your workplace there. But I would say, as that beacon, a lot of times it's better to be the person that points them to the right place rather than the person who becomes the resource. You know, if you need to keep it professional, or if you need to, you know, have that boundary there, because you may have an HR person walking in and knocking on your door at some point. You know your workplace better than anybody.
I have a much more kind of, I guess, like, I think those are all excellent, you know, circumstances where you kind of pay it forward. Like if somebody had done that for you, it might have been great. Like someone had been like this kind of person who could have pointed you in the right direction. When I was trying to get ready for this conversation, you know, I looked up the topic and I was like, okay, so the value of being out kinky. I realized that I have been involved in my community for 7 years. I have been involved in kink for 7 years. I've been involved in community for about 6, and I've only been out, like I've been making like tiered efforts to be a little more out in my life in the past like year and a half. So it's like a really new thing for me. And I think I was trying to think of like what the biggest value was, because it's obviously valuable, or else I would have stopped trying to do it. And it's not just because I'm a masochist. Like, it's been a pleasant experience. I think that the thing that I settled on was that it allowed me to be integrated in this way that has just made me feel as a person like so much healthier and so much more like kind of proud of myself, because for me, my kink life is very much a part of me. Like, a lot of people think of it as like a very compartmentalized part. I'm me on this day, and I'm like a submissive over here, and they're two separate identities, which is totally cool. Like, if that's how you do it. For me, I'm a girl, and I am a service-oriented person, and I am a slut, and I'm a kitten, and I'm a boot black, and I'm all of these things all at the same time. And I don't like to separate them out. I focus a little more on different aspects at different times, but I like this pressure of not having to do that. And one of the first ways I started integrating like that was like keeping my Facebook. I wasn't censoring myself anymore. It's like, if I went to this place and I'm wearing angel wings for no reason on a Wednesday, I'm still putting it on the internet. And if I went and did this cool thing, or I shined a pair of boots and they just look freaking spectacular, I put them on there. And I just got this feeling about myself that was so positive, and I was really, really surprised to get this experience, like, of all these people who are in my circles. They just kind of loved me more for it. Like, it became this strangely, unexpectedly endearing part of me to share these things with them. And it was just this just marvelously positive experience. It also just saved me from so much personal problems. It actually was funny. Today, I swear to God, before this conversation, it was not even planned. I made something for a friend to put on her table for a leather contest. She tagged me in it on Facebook, right, which means my other Facebook friends can see it. My mom commented on it. And she texted me and she said, "Oh, I really love that art you did. What's IML?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, well, I'll tell you." And she went, "Well, that's cool." And I said, yeah, that's pretty cool. And it ended up going it was kind of so seamless, because I was like, well, you're the one who wanted to be integrated. She knows about all the other stuff. Just go ahead and put it out there. And because I was already like so integrated with everything else, it just was seamless. And it's just been a painful process, I think, to be out, mostly because you kill yourself with your own anxiety. But, like, at the end, I've just found it to be such a remarkable tool for, like, self-checking and self-love.
Yeah, and for me, it's probably a little bit less about having that integration, and more for me about being able to be more honest.
Yeah.
That feeling dishonest all the time with whether it's coworkers or professionals or family or church or all the other people in your life, to be able to be honest, to me is the value. That makes it worth it.
Yeah.
Well, and like Josie said, you get to share things you're excited about. So I don't have to have a bullhorn, but if I did something awesome over the weekend and I want to come in and talk to, this particular coworker about it, who I know I've had conversations with before, and I know that person is accepting of me, I kind of get a kick out of, going into the office on Monday and on a coffee break at the water cooler, or step into their office, "Hey, let me tell you about this thing," and I get to share experiences that are cool for me in a lot of ways that you would share if you were a runner. You would talk about a particular event that you're training for, or you would talk about a particular time that you had on a practice run. So just the parts of your life that are important to you, you want to be able to share with other people in your life, and it's shitty if you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, it's unfortunate if you don't. And again, this isn't. I mean, we've had these conversations. You can look back at previous Kink Tank episodes about the problems with coming out and weighing those things about whether you should be out or you should not be out. We're not really going to touch on that this episode here, but just talking about what it's done for us and the good things, I think, and I don't think that, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it was kind of maybe a timing thing. Like, I don't know if I had come out, 10 years before I did, if I would have had a different result. I'm not sure. But it's been a very positive experience for me. I haven't really had any, negative experiences. And I don't really want to, I don't even want to get into the negative experiences, but are there other places in your life, when we talked about professionals, we talked about family, we talked about work, where else does this become important?
Like I said, for me it was family.
Okay.
My parents came to visit. It was really funny. They were here last week, actually. It was both of the girls went with me. We went for dinner, and as it turns out, my aunt and uncle were with my parents, and both of them weren't feeling well, so they didn't come to dinner. They stayed at the hotel, and I laughed when my mom showed up. I said, "Oh, aunt and uncle aren't here. Were you worried that we're going to start asking too many questions that you didn't want to, sort of confess you knew the answers to?" And my mom just kind of rolled her eyes like, "Oh, Lord," like trying to imagine what my rural, Catholic aunt and uncle were going to start asking me, like, "Why are you here with two girls? What's going on?" My parents going, "Oh, just please make the talking stop." Right. So it's kind of funny to see how they react to things. My family's really good about it. My parents have really loved me going poly because they were very clear in that, like, we totally approve of what you do so long as you're happy and ethical. We're great, but we're not buying Christmas presents for everybody, so you're on your own. And so now they've been absolved of, like, the one spouse Christmas gift that they were obligated to get. They're off the hook for that. But I don't ever have a conversation with them where they don't ask me how everybody's doing, and very specifically, they know everybody's names, and they ask me how they're doing, and they pay attention to what's going on in their lives. And again, it feels good for me because I don't feel like I have to hide a partner. They are not minimized in the sort of the scope of my life, so that my parents will say, "Oh, how's Megan's planning for her contest coming? How's Gypsy doing on her with her knee that's all gimped up?" And so I can have real conversations about what's actually going on in my life, and I don't have to feel like, well, I worked all day and that's all I have left to talk about, because that was where the bulk of my life.
That was where the honesty was tripping me up. What'd you do this weekend? Shit. If I actually told you what I did this weekend, so it was like, the usual dinner with friends. That's what a munch became, was dinner with friends. Yeah. She's like, you eat out a lot, don't you? You got a lot of friends, don't you? And I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
I may or may not get. I don't want to say get lynched for this, but maybe. And we've talked about coming out to family and that being parents and siblings. It can also go the other direction to a certain degree. Like, I have kids, and obviously we're not going to have play scenes in front of my kids. Like, it's not calling me bitch in front of my children, but they'll hear me call him sir. And my daughter asked me about it. Why do you call him a sir? And I said it's a respect. It's, I respect him. He takes care of me. Like, they see some semblance of the power exchange, but they see it in an affectionate way. They see him respect me as...
Well, that's just not honest.
Right. And it really went over well. And I think I had mentioned, maybe I talked about it before, but he opens doors for me, and it's gotten to the point where now my kids think it's a game, so they try to run and open the door for me too, because they see him do this thing for me. Or I'll get up and I'll, if I'm going to get a drink, I'll ask him if he wants anything. And so now they've gotten into the habit where if they're getting up, then they'll, Mom, can I get you anything? Like, they're picking up on
that's
respectful
cool.
behavior.
Right. This is not perverse. These are good values to teach. These are, hey, now we're all rushing to open the door for her. And I like that.
Our biggest thing, of course, is, again, to me, the kink, or specifically the kink activities, are, a behind bedroom, kind of closed door sort of thing. Again, if I were vanilla and monogamous, I wouldn't be talking to kids about my sex life. That's just, there's a point where, like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about sex education. I'm not talking about being paranoid about talking to my kids about sex or sexuality, but that's my business. I don't talk to adults about that. Why would I talk to kids about it? But in terms of exposure, being poly, everybody in our house that lives here is poly, and we have a child here. And so we don't have an issue saying that, this is somebody who comes and stays over, right? Kids are a lot more open-minded when they're younger, that, when you start explaining this to a 16-year-old, it starts to seem weird because they were socialized to it. But when you're trying to explain it to a 10-year-old, it's like, oh, that's mommy's other boyfriend. All right. Like, and then it's like, can I go play with my Lego now? They don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And so being out, again, it doesn't have to be offensive. It doesn't have to be vulgar or crass. But again, your kids are going to ask why there are other people here. And to your point, Sky, the people who live here have close relationships with their family, and there's only so much you can hide when there are multiple men and women in the house that are not part of the sort of primary marriage that goes on, where they start going, well, why are all these people here all the time? And at some point you're just like, either I tell you or I just start making more and more outlandish lies just to amuse myself, I guess. I'm not really sure.
Hey, it's Uncle Shane that lives in the basement.
Exactly, right? That roommate gig only works so far. Like, all the parents are coming, like pretend we're not touching. Like, this is, we're sitting on the couch doing nothing, but, and so we, it was sort of an important thing where it was already kind of happening, and so you sort of make a conscious decision about what are you going to choose to hide versus what are you going to be sort of actively conveying in terms of a message, right? And so, you start to have those conversations with, like you said, with kids, where if people ask you about it, come to us, right? Or have them talk, because I don't think that kids have the capacity to understand it, but not necessarily the capacity to explain it in a way that doesn't come off sounding real smarmy, because kids don't know, like, oh, that's my, mom's boyfriend. Like you said, that sounds like it's an affair. Like they caught you together, and now, you sort of had to explain this kind of thing. Instead there are some conversations that are around that, but I don't think, and again, this is where some people may differ, I don't think it's bad to be out to your children about those things, because they're going to be exposed to it, and if you hide it, a couple of things happen. I mean, kids are fairly smart, they're intuitive, and there comes a point when you're going to have to say to them, well, as it turns out, I've been lying to you for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? And I just don't know that it sets a good example. That's always been one of my personal views on parenting, is it's hard to try to instill values in your kids that they are obviously seeing you not do. Yeah. It's important to be honest. You're not. Like, why the fuck should I be? And it's like, all right, well, okay, well, fair enough, on your way. And so it was one of those things where if we expect to be able to teach a lesson about these things on values, then we have to be able to be living them in a way that they can see them. And again, for me, that is the value of being out. And it's interesting because, I've been looking at Facebook and all of this incredible news about the number of congressmen and politicians who are getting into these scandals about saying one thing and doing another. Like, it's just amazing to me how easy your life would be if, either you stop picking on, gay people or women, or you were open about the fact that you were having an affair, or, you were actually, sort of ethically non-monogamous. That's one of the biggest issues that I've had talking to straight people or vanilla people, or more specifically monogamous people, who have said they are more perfectly happy and comfortable cheating on a partner than practicing ethical non-monogamy. And I'm like, I don't understand how what I do is weird when I'm being honest with all of my partners, and you're more comfortable lying to everybody that you're involved with to make this work for you. Like,
and obviously a number of these conversations are good to have with younger children if you're talking about, this issue of, like, poly stuff. Obviously, kink is not a conversation you have, but, like, I love that Sky brought it up about the kids, about, like, normalizing some of these behaviors and being like, yeah, it's a thing, but it's just, it's a respect thing. It's something special that he does for me. I think that's a great way of just kind of feeling like having a good conscience about it. You know, one of my partners has children. He calls me the princess. The kid does, and he's always called me the princess. He probably always will call me the princess. He knows I threw a princess party not long ago, and I walked in the house, and he said, "How'd your princess party go?" And I was like, whoa, because it wasn't really like me who was outing about that, but his parents were like, yeah, we told him you threw a princess party, tell him all about it. But that doesn't have to be a conversation about kink. That ends up being a conversation about a thing that I did, and it's totally normalized to him. Now, I will also say a number of, and this kid's, he's old, he's 13. So, I mean, he's kind of like right in the middle of this range that we're talking about. I know a number of community people, though, that I have encountered recently that I was surprised to find, like, they have older children, like 17-year-old children, and they're, like, out as kinky to them. Like, hey, BDSM is a thing. Consent is a thing. Don't let boys be mean to you unless you want them to. Talk to me about it if you want. This is how we're going to talk about these things. Because they're 17, because they chose to be that out. I think that's a very personal choice that you have to make for yourself. But I think it's worth mentioning, since none of those people are here today, that, you know, that is sometimes a way that I think made them feel good about their conscience. Maybe part of that was like, it's genetic. I'm sure at this point they're going to end up being kinky too. I might as well tell them it's a thing and that they shouldn't sneak around behind my back. Like, some of those people kind of had that mindset, and I think for them, most of them that have told me, has been a positive experience. But that's a thing too, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that we can all be in general agreement here that each individual has to decide, you know, in weighing out. We talked about the values of being out. Everybody has different considerations about the drawbacks of being out. And for some people, that can involve some pretty serious consequences.
Agreed.
You have to know. So, Shane, as you're talking about, you know, practicing what you preach and being able to say, you know, to be honest, you know, if you expect honesty from your children, that you should be honest with them. I mean, yes and no. I know that there are a lot of people that are in a different situation than you and your family, where somebody would really be trying to take that child away.
Agreed. Yeah, I understand that. But the problem that I have, though, and this is one of the huge things, and I think that Josie really nailed this one on the head, is that one of the things that being out, and from my perspective, I really try to encourage people to be out as much as they are capable of being, because it does normalize this stuff. The fact that a child can be taken away because a parent is kinky is because there is still so much secrecy and shame around it that it can be used against people. If we lived in a world where everybody who was gay was out and everybody who was kinky was out, we could get rid of all of that bullshit, and it wouldn't be the reason why bad things happen to people the way it is now. Like, you wouldn't get fired from your job for being outed as kinky, right? But again, part of that problem with things like jobs is some places are not upset that you're kinky. Some places are upset that, you know, you have been lying about what you've been doing. You know, like, are you a part of any other groups or clubs or whatever? And you say, well, no, because I don't want people to know about that. And then they find out. I mean, one of the biggest things that I have an issue with, and I'll speak to somebody else, but I'll leave the names out of it, had a partner who came out to them as a cross-dresser, not trans, but as a kink, like dressing in women's clothes. And they had been together for several years and finally came out about this interest. And we can argue about the benefit of that, but this person wasn't upset that that person was a cross-dresser. This person was upset that they had been lied to for years about this kink. And again, you know, whether you accept that with grace and openness and say, okay, we can explore that, there was a real sense of offense that we've been open and kinky about all this stuff, but you felt compelled to hide this from me. That was as big an issue. And I think that if we can start getting people to have these conversations where, you know, how we live our lives becomes more normalized, because it doesn't impact anybody else. I mean, that's the thing that bothers me about it, is that my being kinky doesn't change the way I do my job. It doesn't change the way that I relate to people. In fact, my perspective is that kink has improved my ability to be empathetic, to understand what negotiation is, to understand what consent is. And those are all positive things in terms of how they affect the world. And the longer that we keep this buried and people stay in the closet, the more harm can come to them.
Yeah, and I wouldn't ever advocate come out because it's good for our kind in our community. You really do have to think about yourself in this situation and your circumstances and how the water feels around you. But it is a nice sort of added benefit, I guess. If you are able to be out, it does overall help in a greater understanding of this. But I don't think anybody should feel a duty, as a social justice warrior, to come out kinky so that they can buck people's perceptions of what it is that we do, and whether we're fit people or mentally sound or whatever. So
Michael, if I may interrupt you, the thing that to your point that you're making, though, we have this conversation about celebrities who come out as gay. Like, oh, there will be an announcement at noon where so-and-so will make their announcement that they are gay. And my point is that when do we get to a point when it doesn't matter? Like, that's not news anymore. That's my point.
Like, you can't come out just because it makes life easier for a million people if it's going to make your life hell in the moment. Because for you, because then we get into this weird thing of, like, if you're not out, you can be guilted. Like, you could be shamed because you didn't set a better example, and that's not fair.
No, I understand that. I understand that.
To be able to be out, you shouldn't feel pressured to be out if it's not in your best interest to be.
Right, and like I said, I encourage people, but I don't judge people for not being out. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that in my life, in my experience, the concerns that I had about coming out to people never bore fruit, right? In the sense that, okay, someone's going to react badly to this, and most people just kind of shrugged and went, all right, not my gig, but, more power to you. But again, it is the mystery and the fact that we continue, or people in our community continue to hide this because they are ashamed of it. At some point, as more and more people come out, it becomes easier to come out.
Yeah, so it's like a happy added benefit.
Yeah, but I agree with you, Shane. I think that your experience coming out, my experience coming out, maybe some other people on this panel, has been a very positive thing for us. We weighed it out. We know the people around us, our circumstances, our situations, and we decided to come out. But what I'm trying to say, impress upon the viewers, is that we're not advocating for coming out. What we're saying is these are the good things that we've gotten from it. This is the value of it. This is what you should put on the plus side of the scale. But we don't know all of the things that are on the minus side of the scale for you. You have to decide that for yourself. And even though our experiences have been largely positive, or at least not, disinherited, excommunicated, or otherwise exiled, that's something for the viewership to consider. Some of the good things that it's done for us. So appreciate everybody's input on this. We're going to sew it up here and move on to another couple of topics in another couple of weeks. But thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you to all the viewership who tuned in, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Cool.
Good night.
Night.
Ah.